Hey there, this is Dave from The Greg and Dave Show. Thank you for listening to the following broadcast here on Public House Media.
Hi everybody, this is Baxter Colburn from Public House Media. From all of us here at PHM, we'd like to thank you for your support and wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
This is Nicole Kelly, host of Loud and Proud here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Loud and Proud, where we talk about issues facing the disability community. A new show comes out weekly. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Loud and Proud. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to How to Write Good. My name is Daniel Poppie, and I'm your host. Find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. Poppie is spelled P-O-P-P-I-E. If you enjoy this podcast, please follow it on Facebook if you aren't already. And if you are following it on Facebook, feel free to like and share because despite the fact that those things are really, really helpful for people putting out stuff because it gets the word out, and there may, on an off chance, be someone that actually may enjoy this podcast that is part of your friends list. Now, Facebook's a little weird because even if you like or share something, it doesn't necessarily show up to somebody until a little later, but that's just kind of how it is. I actually haven't been doing a very good job posting stuff on Facebook recently on How to Write Good's Facebook page because I've just been so busy, but I hope to continue doing that starting this upcoming week. So you will see this. If you don't see it on Facebook, you will see this in another way, like you'll see this specific episode on Facebook in the upcoming weeks, or you'll see the upcoming weeks on Facebook. So again, follow How to Write Good, like and share stuff. Also, check out Public House Media. They've got quite a few different podcasts going on, a lot of different types of podcasts. This podcast is the only one about writing, so if you want to talk about writing and you want to hear stuff about writing, you're kind of stuck with me if you stick with Public House. But if you want to hear about other stuff, there's a lot of other things, including, and I think I mentioned it before, a pageantry podcast. And it's amazing to me. So I kind of worry sometimes. I'm like, well, I'm making a podcast about writing, and who the heck is going to listen to a podcast about writing besides myself or people I know really well? And then I think, I'm like, okay, they're making a pageantry podcast. And who's going to listen to a pageantry podcast? But I'm getting kind of down on it because there are people who like those things. Like, everybody has different types of interests, and there's people who really like pageantry. Man, it's a hard word to say for me. Some people really like pageantry, and some people like writing, and some people like not just listening to somebody who has tons and tons of books out, but maybe listening to someone who's a little bit smaller. Side note on that, I always prided myself. So before, when I listen to music or I watch something or I found out about a specific person, I always prided myself that I find out about like people, or I'd be fans, I guess, of specific people who put out different content like music or books or different things like that who weren't really well known. So I was never a big fan, and I'm kind of, in a way, I kind of am a little contrarian, and I'm not trying to be like, oh, I'm cool. That's cool. I think that being contrarian just for the sake of it is kind of dumb. I think you actually have to have reasons. I do actually have reasons behind what I say. Otherwise, I couldn't actually have this podcast. Otherwise, it would just be me saying, oh, this sucks and that sucks, which some of it is, but I always try to have reasons behind it. But I always prided myself in finding people that were smaller, or it wasn't the mainstream, and that's kind of a hipster thing to say. But yeah, I always thought that was cool. And when I was starting this podcast, I'm like, well, I like stuff that's on a smaller scale, more personal. It's just somebody doing something and trying to do something. So I'm like, well, there's some hope for this podcast. Maybe it can go somewhere. So that is, I guess, my intro. We're going to jump right into my word of the week. And so the word of the week is subnivean. And I'm not positive if you say it that way. I checked the pronunciation, how do you pronounce the word. And I'm like, okay, I think that's how you pronounce it. Subnivean, and all it means is happening under the snow, or something under the snow. So again, this Christmas season, this winter season, and I'm probably not going to continue it in January because I don't think there's enough. I don't think there's enough winter words. Well, there are, but they're stupid. I don't think there's enough cool winter words because we end up with things like sposh, and sposh isn't a cool winter word. And I'm sorry about that. I failed you. I brought a really, really dumb winter word, and I presented it to you, and you had to listen to me talk about it and say what it was. But I don't think there's enough cool winter words that are useful, winter words that are interesting to actually have for the whole entire winter, because we've got about 78 more weeks of winter. It's longer than the year, and I don't think we're going to last. So again, the word of the week is subnivean, and it means under the snow or happening under the snow or occurring under the snow. You get the gist of it. All right, we're going to jump into our accidental essence, and this week I'm going to talk about the phrase that is put up by has been expressed by several very well-known writers, and I think that even Hemingway said this, and I've heard this other things, and I've heard there's a very famous writing book, a book by a writer, and I haven't read her stuff, but the stuff that I've seen of hers, I didn't necessarily like, and it's not ripping on her. I'm not trying to rip on her. It's just my personal tastes don't fit with how she writes. And there's people who I'm certain, actually one of them's in my family, my personal writing style doesn't fit with their personal tastes. All right. So, again, I'm talking the topic. I'm taking on the phrase, write drunk, edit sober. And this lady, she wrote Bird by Bird. I can't remember her name, but she's a really, really famous writer, and she wrote Bird by Bird, and it's a really famous writing book. If you look up books to read about writing, hers is in the top 5, I'm almost certain. It's like Stephen King, hers, and somebody else's. Hers might be in the top 3, actually. But she actually had this as a portion of the book. I think it was a whole chapter that the portion of the book was write drunk, edit sober. And I've argued with people about this. My favorite side note here, my favorite type of people to be around are people who just really like ideas a lot and are willing to challenge you on ideas and not like attack you for your ideas, but to just be like, hey, like, I think you're wrong about those ideas. And I'm just like, yeah, okay, that's fine. You can attack me I'll try to like support what I'm saying. But I think that's probably one of my favorite type of, there's probably, that's one of the favorite types of people I like being around. Now, there's another type of people who likes attacking you for your ideas and just being like, you are completely wrong, boom, and then they just tell you you're wrong, and they just like, they just crush you, they just beat you down, they just cudgel you. And I don't like being around those people. But someone who's like, hey, I don't really necessarily agree with that, why do you think that's the case? I actually appreciate those people a lot, because they express the fact that they don't agree with you, but at the same time they're giving you a chance to actually talk about what you're saying, and they're actually giving clear logical reasoning behind why they don't agree with you, and they don't hate you, and they don't tell you, oh, you're wrong and they have to be correct. And just to make it clear, I may actually fall into that second category of the person who may just say, oh, you're wrong and you have to be correct. I'm not completely sure. I try not to be that person, but I might be that person. Okay, so write drunk, edit sober, and I've gotten off on a lot of tangents today, and it's the Christmas season, so I may or may not have had a beer already today, but that's just how it is, because it is the Christmas season, and it's just festive, and I love it. It's great. I used to not like Christmas a lot, and my wife is making me enjoy Christmas a lot more. I'm getting into the spirit of things, like I talked about last week or the week before, I can't even remember, where I said that people should just go all out with Christmas. Seriously, just make it a huge thing. Make it the whole entire month of December. Make it the whole entire month of December. Actually, I learned from my wife the other day that the 12 days of Christmas start on Christmas and get done in January on Epiphany, which I think is the 6th. Yeah, that would make sense, right? Starts on the 25th, gets done on the 6th. I'm not sure. I can't do math right now. I'm not going to do math right now. So I think there's some validity to this thought, okay? So there's some validity to this idea of write drunk, edit sober, and I want to like break it apart. I think there's two different thoughts that come out of this. I think there's two different reasons why someone might say write drunk, edit sober. The first reason is that a person, by drinking, you are becoming more creative, okay? All right, and I think that's completely wrong, but I think that's the first thing that might come out of this. So I'm going to break that apart. I'm going to go after that right away. So with this idea of write drunk, edit sober, I don't think it's necessarily just drinking. I don't think it's necessarily alcohol. I think within this, so there's this idea within the creative community, and I think it's taken on by a lot of people who are creative, that if you take drugs, if you do marijuana, if you do coke or speed or whatever, you're going to be more creative. Or if you drink, so if you get drunk while you're drinking, you're going to be more creative. You're going to be more open to new ideas if you're drinking. I think that's wrong. I don't think it's correct. I'll get to that, why that's wrong. But this is the first thing. So I think that there are specific drugs that may actually make you more creative. I don't actually think hallucinogenics make you more creative. It's a little different. But if you think about like speed, it actually makes you think faster. So there's the reason why they say, write drunk, edit sober. This isn't the main reason. This is something that someone might think, but this covers all different types of drugs. The reason someone might say, write drunk, edit sober, or maybe write high, edit sober, or maybe any other type of drug you're going to take an hallucinogenic, and then you edit sober, and you fix it when you're sober. It actually, I think it's contradictory, actually. I'm going to get to that, but I think it covers all different types of drugs, because there's an assumption, as I was saying, in the artistic community that if you want to write something good, you should probably do it when you're drunk, because it opens up, it allows you to connect to the muse. Now, what it does when you're drinking is it allows you to feel better, maybe. Well, maybe not me. Actually, I've had this thing. If I've had too many drinks, I actually don't feel good. So and I'll just say it right now. I was going to have a better organized thing where I got to this later, and I always want to wrap it up in a nice bow, but today I don't care. So when you drink, if you don't know this already, your attention narrows. So you start like when you're fully aware, or even if you have some coffee, when you're stimulated, your mind's stimulated, you have some coffee, or even if you had some other type of thing, if you had like Ritalin or Speed or Adderall, that's waking up your frontal lobe, those things. So it's making your frontal lobe work really quickly. And coffee does the same thing. It gets your blood pumping. It makes your brain work faster. And you're able to attend to a lot of different things around you at the same time. So if you're a teacher and you want to pay attention to your class, it's not going to help you if you're like, oh, I'm going to just take a drink right now of alcohol, because it's going to slow your mind down, whereas caffeine speeds you up. So you should drink a lot of caffeine if you're a teacher, because you can attend to all these, especially if you're a kindergarten teacher, because you can go boom, 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 and you can switch. Side note here. So if you ever thought of the idea, so there's this idea that you can multitask, and this idea of multitasking is that you can take multiple complex activities at the same time and do them at the same time and switch between them. Do them at the same time, parallel. So there's this, in computers, there's something called parallel processing, and I actually don't even know if this exists in a computer right now, but in parallel processing, it means that there's two different things going on at once. There's processing of one thing and the other. That's why it's called parallel processing. So multitasking is this idea that you can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. Now, people conflate that with this idea that you can do complex tasks at the same time. And in some way you can, and in another way you can't. So there is a complex task you know really, really well that's habitual, and there's a complex task that actually requires your concentration. So if you are trying to read and you are trying to do a very sophisticated guitar solo, you're not going to be able to do those things because they're a complex task, okay? But if you do one or the other. So you can there's specific tasks you know how to do. So if someone is playing an instrument, they're doing multiple things at the same time, but their brain, they've practiced that instrument so much that they've made it a habit. So they don't even think about doing it. So there's this, it's kind of like a subconscious processing, okay? But if you try to do two things at once that are like conscious, so if you try to read and you try to play like that guitar solo, you're not going to be able to do it because your brain needs to focus on both things at the same time. And the best you're going to be able to do is switching between one and the other. So in one way, multitasking exists if you have a habit formed where you don't even have to think about the thing. But in another way, if you're trying to do complex things that you actually have to pay attention to, multitasking does not exist. So with alcohol, going back to alcohol, when you drink alcohol, you have all those things you're attending to. You can focus, you can switch around. Then as you drink alcohol, your brain slows down. It's kind of like getting more tired. Actually, it's really close to getting more and more tired. That's why you get tired when you drink alcohol, right? So, and your body slows down too. So your focus narrows, and it narrows. And if you can't see me, I'm actually narrowing my hand, actually doing this. If there was a visual, you could see it. But it narrows and narrows until you can only focus on one thing. Okay? So that's what happens when you drink alcohol. So the argument was, it's going to make us more creative. It's going to open us up to different things. And I think that's wrong. It goes back to the narrowing of everything. But the other idea, and I think this is more to the point of why the quote was made. So the quote is write drunk, edit sober. And I think this is actually more representative of what that person meant. It might have actually been Hemingway who had the quote. I'm not going to check it right now because I've already made my outline. I'm not going to break in the middle of this and check it. It's not really important who said it. It's just meaning. So I think the actual meaning and why it was said was because the person who was writing, I think a lot of creative people have mental issues. I think they have a lot of issues, and I think that creativity is a way to essentially express those issues and escape those issues at the same time. But if you are someone who has a lot of issues, if you have a lot of insecurities and you try to write, you're always going to be thinking about those insecurities. You can always be thinking, is this good? Is this not? And I've run into people who do a lot of writing, and I have a friend, and I'm going to explain what he does, but they write and they're like, this isn't good enough. So they write again, and they're like, this isn't good enough. They keep on throwing away their material. Okay, so they keep throwing away the stuff they're writing. And so what I think, and my friend, actually, he's got so much stuff in his head. I think that it takes so long. What he does is he writes a word. He thinks about exactly what he's going to write. He writes another word. And he says it it takes him 2 to 3 hours to write a paragraph, which is insane. But I mean, his stuff is really thick. It's not a popular reader's dream. It's more of someone who's really sophisticated because he's really sophisticated. I want to have him on the show at some point, but I'm not going to tell you who he is if I have him on unless he lets me right now. I'm not going to tell you who I'm talking about if they're on the show unless they say I can. He probably won't let me. But But he takes 3 hours to write a paragraph, and I would just go nuts. And I understand, if he wrote a book, it would just be a tome, it'd be just the thickest. It would just, you read through it, and you're like, man, you get 50 things out of this one paragraph. Okay, so the second reason, and going back, the writer's anxious. They don't know if they can write something good, so they keep on throwing away their material. If you write drunk, your focus narrows until you're just focused on what you're writing, and then you don't worry about it as much. I think most people generally have a better attitude when they're drunk. They can't think about things as well. They don't worry as much. But then once you write the whole entire book, and you don't look at the book, you just don't touch it until it's done. Because if you look back and you start to read it, you're like, oh man, this is the worst thing in the world. I'm just going to throw it out because nothing can ever happen to it, because there's such an insecurity in a lot of writers. And I believe this is true. I think I can see it in my own writing. I think there's such an insecurity that they're like, I just can't do this. I have to throw it out. It's never going to make it anywhere. It's just awful, awful, awful. So that's the second reason. I think there's some validity to thinking that way. I think that if you're really hard on yourself, which I think a lot of creative people are, like I said, I think a lot of them have a lot of issues. I'm not taking myself out of that mix, but I think drinking would help you forget forget the worry when you're writing stuff on paper. Or if you drink a little too much, you'll just fall asleep on your keyboard or whatever you're writing with. Maybe you write with a typewriter. And I also think that this applies to other drugs as well. It kind of frees your mind up not to think about stuff. Like if you have a high, you feel really good. You're going to be writing with more ease. And people, like I said, people say, oh, drugs will help you be more creative. This is this whole idea with the Beatles. And other drugs, there's specific drugs that may help you think faster or may help you see things differently. If you do something that's hallucinogenic, it's going to help you perceive the world differently because it's changing your brain chemistry and actually how that's working in there, but I don't think it's actually making you more creative. Okay, and a quick side note. So the issue with me is with drinking is if I tried to write drunk and edit sober, I would just be worried about stuff the whole time, because when I drink too much, I start to worry about stuff. So some people, when they drink a lot, they get in a really happy mood. They just stuff starts flowing, and that happens once in a while. If I don't try to have too many drinks. That happens once in a while, but most of the time I'm just like, man, I've got all this stuff I've got to get done, and I'm not getting it done. So I just worry too much. So I don't want to do it anyways. But the issue that it comes down to. So what the goal is of writing drunk and editing sober is making a good book. Okay, that's like the whole goal of a writer, to make a good book, make a book that other people. And I don't see how getting drunk or taking other drugs makes a good book in itself. Because when you're talking about these things, you have a premise, and the premise of people who say that phrase is, this is going to open up your mind, this is going to help you focus better, this is going to help you forget about stuff in your life and help you just write. And I think the premise is wrong, and because we start at a different, it's like a foundation. If you build, it's like the foundation of your thought. If my foundation is over here and my foundation is set up in a specific way, if my foundation is a triangle, I'm not going to build a circle on that foundation. I'm not going to build a cylinder on the foundation. If my foundation is a square, I could build a triangle on it. Or if it's a circle, I'm not going to build a square on it. It doesn't fit. So in the same way, you have a premise and you're trying to build up like a logical thought with it, and you're trying to get to a conclusion, and your conclusion is going to change based on what that premise is. And I disagree with the premise. And I think that people I don't know if people do this. People probably do this. I always try to assume that people are thinking the way I am at the very least, because if they're thinking the way I am, I'm like, okay, at least they're putting some thought into what they're doing. I don't know if that's actually true. I'm not trying to be mean to people. I don't know if it's actually true, but I think people should think about the premises actually, that they are basing their thoughts on. So why do you think about the thing you do? What's the basic belief that's the foundation? I'm not saying you shouldn't have them, because everyone does. I don't think you can get rid of them. If you say, I don't have a premise that I base something on. I don't have it's like essentially a paradigm, like your foundation. I don't have a foundation I built upon. Well, the fact that you're saying that is a foundation. So saying there's no foundation I built upon, I just take things as they come, is a philosophical foundation of saying, well, I've got to take things as they come. So you can't get away from it. Whatever. But like I said, there's certain drugs that are probably, I'm getting off on tangents today, but that's okay. There's certain drugs that are probably helpful to a certain degree, like caffeine and speed. Don't take speed. Caffeine will help you a bit, especially if you're really tired. But getting blasted or high, I don't think it helps people write well, okay? And I don't think it helps people write well, because they can't, if you drink a lot of alcohol, and the phrase refers to getting drunk, and I know it refers to getting drunk, and I'm kind of bringing other things into it, but I'm trying to address this whole entire idea of taking drugs just to be creative. Okay, that's what I'm trying to address. I'm not trying to address just drinking, but I'll explain why I think drinking. So I talked about how drinking narrows your focus, and I talked about creativity in the past, how you need to be able to attend to different things and think about different things and bring those in and make decisions about stuff. And you've got a lot of stuff going on in your head. When I write, I've got at least 3 things going on in my head at once and spinning, like plates spinning in my head and trying to make decisions and flipping stuff around. I'm thinking ahead. I'm also determining what I'm writing. Maybe it's 4 things in my head. But if you're super focused, so if you have too much alcohol, your attention focuses where you only can focus on one thing. And how are you going to so if your attention is only focused on one thing, and I know I just interrupted myself there, that was a little weird, but if your attention is focused only on one thing, how are you going to bring those other ideas into that story and actually tell a good story with unique ideas if you're always focused on one thing? Okay, that's my main issue with it. My second thing is the premise is wrong. There's the premise that creativity makes a good book, okay? All right? And somebody might be like, whoa, creativity does make a good book. And on the surface, I'm like, yeah, I agree with that statement. Creativity makes a good book, but creativity is not the bedrock, okay? I'm not talking about the same thing, but creativity is not the bedrock of a good book, all right? I think creativity is expressed in a book or a story or a movie, and it comes from something else, all right? If that makes sense? So creativity, you need creativity, and you need a mindset that looks at the world differently. That's how I define creativity. You see things in the world that other people don't. You're extracting things from the world. You're taking concepts out of the world and putting them into a story. But I don't think creativity I don't think creativity is like the start. I think it's like the end result of something else. All right. So what makes a good book then? So there's the foundation, and then creativity is built off of that. Or if you can think of it like this. So creativity isn't the root. The root is something else, or the root, however you want to say it. I don't really care. The root is something else, and creativity is like the flower that grows out of it. Or creativity is the branch, and then the creation that you make is the flower, or something like that. Or the creation is the fruit. There you go. So what makes a good book? So what I believe makes a good book or any piece of art is the same exact thing. All right. And it comes down to two things: hard work and the time you put into it. All right. This is kind of the idea between talent and skill. That's really what this is. So what really annoys me, and I know it's annoyed other people in the past I've talked to because they've expressed it. I have a friend. We haven't talked in a really long time. I don't even know if we're friends anymore. But I have a friend who was a music major in college, and she had recitals. And I went to one of her recitals, and after the recital, she was talking about how people always come up to her, and she's like, oh, they're always like, oh, you're so talented. And she's like, I put in so many hours a day to do this super well, and you're saying I'm talented? No, I work my butt off to be able to do this. All right? And people assume that people who are really successful are just really talented. People assume that who really good at something. And I'm not saying I'm really good at writing. I'm not saying I'm really good at anything. I'm just saying I think that the thing that makes a good book, the thing that makes anything that you're creating, the thing that makes a good house is the hard work you put into it and the skill that you're able to do that with. And you may be like, well, isn't like skill the exact same thing as talent? So there was a cartoon I saw the other day. It might have been yesterday. It might have been the day before. And it was, I can't remember what cartoon it was. But if the cartoonist listens to this, the cartoonist will know. But I'm sure the cartoonist doesn't. But it's one of those famous cartoons that's rolling around the internet. And I'm sure that a lot of people have been seeing this. There's multiple panels. And the cartoonist is over there like drawing stuff. And the person's like, oh, how do you get so like good at this? And then the cartoonist is like, oh, time and hard work. Or something to that effect. The effect of time and hard work. And I feel like I'm losing my voice right now. And then the person keeps on asking, they're like, I wish I was as good as you. And the cartoonist is just like, time and hard work. And then the person's like, man, like, I'll never be that good. And the cartoonist is just like, time and hard work, yada, yada, yada. They're talking about how well they can draw. And all they keep on saying is time and hard work. And that's really what it comes down to. And some people may naturally be better at things, but really, if you're going to be really good at something, if you're going to gain a skill and be really skilled at the thing, it's going to take time and hard work. Okay, so writing is thinking. Let's go back to writing and let's go back to books. Writing is thinking. And going back to taking drugs and everything like that, people don't do their best thinking when they're drunk. People don't generally do their best thinking when they're taking other drugs, but they certainly don't do maybe coffee. Maybe they do their best thinking when they're drinking coffee. They do not do their best thinking when they're drinking. They may be very honest, but if you've ever talked to someone who's drunk, you know that they're not doing their best thinking. I can think of one instance when I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was going through a rough patch in his life, and I went out to a bar with another friend, and he was there, and he was just, I told him, like, dude, like, you were telling me this and that. He's like, dude, I'm so embarrassed that I told you that. And I'm just like, it's all right. But he wasn't doing his best thinking, and he never did his best thinking when he was drinking a lot. And for how being drunk works, so drinking narrows your focus, and for how that works, it makes a lot of sense. So drinking narrows your focus until you can think about less and less. You're not going to be able to actually take into and factor in other things. You're just going to have your one thought, and you're going to express that one thought. When you write or create something, and specifically we're talking about writing here, you need to be able to see all the different options, and you need to be able to pick and write the best one. All right, and I'm going to get back to that hard work and whatever. So if you're drinking or if you're taking another drug, your writing's narrowed, your writing is distorted, and all those different options. People assume that people assume that when people are successful in a different area, and I'm not at all saying I'm successful in writing. I think that if I'm ever successful in writing, it's due to the fact that I'll be doing a lot of hard work in it. If this podcast is ever a really big success, it'll probably be 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years later from this time. But people assume that if you are successful in something, you just have a talent and you haven't been working at it. But the real thing that I think that makes a book good is if you have a book, you have an idea, and you're really meticulous with it. And writers, like going back to that idea that writers are really hard on themselves and they're throwing out their material. Well, you've got to write the book. I agree with that. You've got to get the book out, but you've got to be hard on yourself. You've got to be willing to learn. You've got to put in that time. You've got to put in that hard work, and that's what's going to produce a good book. So I don't think that people should worry. I don't think that people should think, oh, if I drink a lot, I'm going to get a really good book, because that's how it works. Because Ernest Hemingway said you should write drunk and edit sober. Therefore, if I write drunk and edit sober, then I'm going to have a good book. Well, you're not Ernest Hemingway. And he died pretty young. Ernest Hemingway killed himself. So if you want to kill yourself, go for it. No, don't kill yourself. But you're not Ernest Hemingway. And Ernest Hemingway, if he did not work on what he did, he had an extreme talent. I'll use talent this time. If he did not put the work in, he had an extreme talent to be able to express things, okay? For whatever reason. But for most of us slobs, we are going to actually have to put in really hard work to do that kind of work. If you're someone who's like, oh man, I'm not going to be able to ever write that good, why? Like, why wouldn't you ever be able to write that well? I just said good instead of well. I'm sorry about that. But the whole entire podcast is how to write good, so get over it. Okay, if you can't write that well, then put in more work and be really critical of yourself and keep on improving and improving and improving and improving. But I don't think the answer lies in drinking a lot or taking other drugs, and it doesn't really make sense. Like, no other job does their best work when they're on drugs. Except creative people think that they can do their best work on drugs, but no other job can. You can't design a bridge. I mean, there is probably someone who could design a bridge drunk and make it good, but like they can do it better when they're sober. There's nobody who does. There's not an air traffic controller doing really good work drunk. Lawyers don't go to. You don't want your surgeon on something when they're doing something. Why would you expect to be able to do really good work if you're on a drug, or if you're drunk while you're writing, or you're making music, or you're making a painting? It doesn't make sense to me. All right, that's all I've got for you this week. Before the logical fallacy, we're going to jump into the logical fallacy, and the logical fallacy, because I'm already over time, so this is going to be really quick. My gosh, I can't talk today. The logical fallacy of this week is the referential fallacy. Okay, and what you do in the referential fallacy is you assume all words refer to existing things. Okay, so you're essentially assuming that words exist within the things that they represent. So words aren't the things they represent, right? Words they're symbols of the things they represent. They're expressing an idea about something else. So they exist within. That's the referential fallacy. It's like, oh, I have a lamp, therefore the word exists within. And this actually connects back to this idea of concepts I talked about last week. So with concepts, the concept of something, it goes with the thing. It doesn't separate from the thing, but the terms or the words we use can be used for whatever. I can call an apple banana. If everybody just started calling an apple a banana, then we'd still have an apple. It wouldn't change the thing, but we could still refer to it in that way. So the referential fallacy is assuming that when you talk about something, that thing actually exists. It actually is referring to something concrete. Okay, so just because you're expressing something doesn't mean it exists. Because I can say, oh, a unicorn, but a unicorn doesn't actually refer to anything. It's just something we made up in our heads. So so this kind of goes back to the meaning, like what I was saying with concepts, and the meaning of words is based on how they're used, not necessarily the reality around them. All right, so that's all I've got for you this week. You've got an extra 3 minutes, so I hope that's good. Have a Merry Christmas. I think that if you are a Christian, you should say Merry Christmas. So if you're not a Christian and you are not saying if you are a Christian, if you're not a Christian, this is a little different. If you are not a Christian, if you are a Christian, my gosh, if you are a Christian and you aren't saying Merry Christmas, you should, because think about it. Like, that is the best, like you're saying, oh, have a good day, but you're saying like, have a good life, have a good eternity, essentially, if you're a Christian. And if you aren't a Christian, I think you should be like, yeah, that person's wishing me well. And if somebody said Happy Hanukkah, I'd be like, oh, that's cool. Like, they're saying have a good time. I'm like, yeah, I'll have a good Hanukkah. I don't celebrate Hanukkah, but I mean, like, if somebody was Jewish and they like have Happy Hanukkah, I don't think they say that, but I'd be like, oh yeah, thanks, that's great. So I think that if you are a Christian, you should wish people Merry Christmas, because it focuses on the central aspect of your religion. There's a reason why Christians celebrate Christmas and what it's about. So I think that you should. If you don't, you should probably question what you actually believe. And if you are not a Christian, just take it and be like, hey, that's nice. That's a nice person. They're wishing me well. If you're one of those people that is like, oh, Merry Christmas, don't say that. Well, you should stop listening to my podcast because that's kind of annoying. Like, get over it, really. Like, if there was a Satanist and they're like, oh, happy whatever, Satan, whatever, I'd be like, okay, like, I guess they wish me well. And I'd be like, well, I don't agree with anything they say whatsoever, but they were really, really nice to me. And if they were my friend, I'd talk to them about it. But if they're just some random person on the street, like, I don't want to ruin their day. And it's kind of ruining mine if I'm just barking at them about something. But Merry Christmas. I know it's already passed, but some people may be celebrating it. Don't stay up too late on New Year's because it's a fake holiday. It's all right. It's an okay holiday, but it's just an arbitrary time we set for that. Christmas is kind of an arbitrary time, but the reason you celebrate it isn't arbitrary. Whatever. You could actually have like a New Year's celebration anytime you wanted. Like, it's just starting over. It's essentially a starting over holiday. But that's all I've got for you. Have a good week. Have a good rest of December. I hope that everything goes well, and I'll be looking forward to, and I'm going to be starting to find people to come on the show and talk to me, because I know it's only been like 11 weeks, but I know everyone's getting tired of just listening to me talk. So, all right, see you later.